welcome to another episode of Tesseract Talks, the place where we put the spotlight on tech trends, startups, and VCs. I'm your host, Marko, the founder and CEO of Tesseract Analytics, and it is my pleasure today to have James Rees as our guest. He's a managing director and principal security consultant at Razorthorn Security with over 25 years of experience in information security and consultancy. James, welcome. How are you?
Not too bad, not too bad. It's a bit hot, but other than that, it's fantastic and it's brilliant to be on the podcast.
We're happy to have you. And just for the audience, although officially your name is James, I will call you Jim, as we've agreed.
Yeah. Everybody calls me Jim.
Great. So you've been almost 3 decades now in the security and consulting business. Why don't we start by you telling us about your career journey? What were some of the roles you had over the years? And at what point did you decide to start Razorthorn Security?
Yeah, that's a long and expansive question, but I'll give you the quick version. So like a lot of people back in the day when I was 18 or so, I kind of got into IT. It's where I wanted to get into. And when I did get into IT, it took a little while, but once I did get in, I started thinking about my career in that path. And very quickly, I realized that nobody gave a stuff about information security or IT security as it was known back then. So in order to differentiate myself from, the second line support people, the third line support people, I very much took on board IT security is my thing. Back then it was antivirus. We didn't really have firewalls back then. That's how old I am. Email security was very, very new. And I kind of followed that path, really. I started out in reinsurance firms, a variety of different ones. And then I kind of moved into kind of a more consulting role. Again, implementing AV. It was big money back then. From there, I kind of progressed through a few more consulting roles before I finally wound up at a particularly well-known and affluent newspaper, a financial newspaper, where I ran a lot of the security for the IT teams and the architecture teams and all the rest of it. And then when 2007, 2008 credit crunch hit, like a lot of people, especially in this particular space, in the InfoSec space as it was known as then, the cuts came and we were part of those cuts. Apparently IT can look after information security, and it was interesting. But like all true good Brits who's just been made redundant, me and my team went down to the pub and we kind of had a few beers, considered our sins. I went through my bins and decided, what I really want to do? I want to kind of go freelance and just kind of find out where this economic crisis is going. I was quite well known then, had a lot of good interactions with people, and it was very easy for me to get the freelance work. It was a lot easier back then. Seemingly I did well at it, and Razorthorn Security became less of a one-man band, and I started taking on staff, salespeople kind of thing, pen testers. And it quickly kind of evolved into the business that it is today. 17 years later, it's been a wild ride seeing how security has changed in that time. But now it's a really big ticket item. If you asked me 10 years ago, we were all about dealing with financial institutions, service providers, that kind of thing. Nowadays, we have got pretty much every sector under the sun as part of our portfolio of clients, from pharmaceutical through to automotive to R&D. You name it, we've got a customer in that space or multiple customers in that space over multiple jurisdictions, Europe, a couple of customers in the US, offshore, that kind of thing. So yeah, it's been good, but that's the helicopter version of how I got where I am and where Razorthorn originally came from.
No, great journey. And it seems that you're just starting with Razorthorn in terms of like what's coming up and everything. But great. So now let's dig a bit more into some of the kind of topics and burning questions. So right now, we've been hearing about AI every day now on our news feeds. So AI is getting more sophisticated, and the attack surface as well of organizations is increasingly expanding every day. What are your recommendations for companies? How should they prioritize, let's say, their limited security budgets?
That is a very good question, and it's a very tough one to answer. Because there's a lot of components into this. Now, I've seen technology over 25 years change rather dramatically. I was there for Y2K. At the time we all thought that was the worst thing that could have happened in the world. But our technological capability was very low, and AI was just a dream back then. It was something that you saw in Terminator. It was something you saw in film. But now we're reaching a point where it is actually becoming a real reality, and has done for a little while now. And as we get better at developing it, it's becoming faster and faster as technology that's becoming beneficial and provides a lot of concern to a lot of people about, their jobs and all the rest of it. But from a technological point of view, what it's done is it's dramatically changed the way that we look at our defense in depth. And defense in depth is something you'll hear from a lot of security people around how do we defend an organization from a policy and process point of view, a people point of view, and a technology point of view, because security isn't just about the technological aspect. There's a lot of other stuff that goes into it as well. Look at incident response, good example. Real key component to any organization's defense in depth. Why? Everybody at some point has a security event. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter whether you're a big company, a small company. At some point, you're going to have something that goes wrong, or you're going to have a malicious actor that successfully phishes someone, or you're going to have a technology that gets compromised. And this is why you have to do a lot of assurance for your organizations, so you at least understand what vulnerabilities you have. Now, how do we do that historically? Penetration testing to make sure that we implemented our firewalls correctly, that our defense in depth was doing what it said on the tin. Now we're getting more sophisticated threat actors in the form of certain gangs from certain parts of the world who may or may not be state sponsored, who operate like corporations, like organizations like mine, like yours, like anybody who's listening to this. And they have a lot more money to play with to compromise other organizations to make more money than, as you quite rightly pointed out, in our budgets that we actually have to defend it. It's an ongoing war. And all that AI is producing is faster and quicker ways for the bad guys to generate and to make more efficient their ability to compromise organizations. And we're seeing that time and time again in the news. If you haven't been hearing about all of the compromises just in the UK and Europe alone, let alone the States, you've obviously been living under a rock somewhere, because it's getting more and more important. And the thing about security is it has to adapt with the times. Now, when we have technology speeding up in the development of its capability, we have to consistently and constantly up our defense in depth stacks to include new methods of assurance and making sure that we know how secure or insecure our environments or our key assets are. Now, one of the big players on the market at the moment that a lot of people are interested in is something called CTEM, which is Continuous Threat Exposure Management. We have a product in that space. There's a number of other firms that have a product in that space. And it's fast, not replacing pen testing, but it's kind of the midway between vulnerability scanning and penetration testing. And the reason being is what it does is it kind of stretches that penetration test over the full 12-month period, rather than it being a snapshot in time, which is kind of the problems we had historically. You have all this new technology, a new web app that you wanted to release, you do a pen test on it before it goes live, boom, fantastic. But you don't stop developing that web app. So the next iteration of that web app may come, say, 6 weeks down the line, but you don't necessarily have a pen test again. It's expensive to consistently do constantly every 5 minutes, which is why we're having to update the way that we do our defense in depth and our assurance. And AI is part of that process, as well as being tested now. There's very specialized pen testers who can, look at the various different problems that AI has. There's a lot of them. We've done a lot of podcasts on this, which kind of goes into a lot more depth. But we obviously don't have a lot of time here. But it's going to be interesting how things pan out. And I think in the next 2 to 3 years, it's going to be a completely different place to where we are now. And we're going to have to constantly re-review how we secure the environments as that progresses as well. And it's never going to stop. It's never going to stop.
Besides the constant threat of attackers, organizations also need to keep an eye on the compliance side. So tell us, how important is, let's say, the Digital Operational Resilience Act, more known as DORA, because we keep on hearing last and this year a lot about DORA. So what are some key takeaways, and who should be paying attention to it?
I think everybody needs to pay attention to compliance and frameworks and legislation that's coming out. There's a lot of it. There's a lot of it being updated as well. DORA is a really key piece of legislation that has been needed for some time. I mean, let's be honest. The reason why legislation, compliance, and compliance frameworks exist was because organizations weren't doing it beforehand. If they were all doing security perfectly, which is kind of impossible anyway, then you wouldn't have things like DORA forcing the issue and putting the onus back on the C-suite, the owners, to make sure that they're securing their environments correctly. You've got NIS2, which is coming out, which is around critical services. DORA is more around the finance sector. These are critical components to our society that need to be secured. Otherwise, it has real world effects on people, countries, the stability of countries. And we're starting to see more and more cybersecurity threats from nation states where, they're coming in and trying to disrupt things. They're trying to cause problems and so on and so forth. I'm a big supporter of DORA, I'll be honest, because it's not uber specific around what it requires you to do. It tells you just got to take security seriously. Now, there are items in there that you need to facilitate, but you used to hear quite a bit that security compliance, like PCI DSS, I'm a QSA myself, I've been a QSA for many years, is a tick box exercise. And now you can't be more wrong with that. If you're just using compliance as a tick box exercise to do more business, then you're doing this wrong. Security is about securing your organization and its key assets from bad events, compromises, malicious or accidental, from occurring in your organization that completely destroys your ability to operate. I mean, look at the NES stuff recently, Did they have good security? Yeah, they probably did, but obviously something went wrong. They got compromised. The same with a lot of other organizations. And this is what these compliance frameworks are there to do. And even if you're not in the finance space or the critical services space for NIS2, or healthcare for HIPAA, and all the high trust and all the various different models that you see out there, both US and European, you should look at them objectively and say, well, what are we doing? I mean, let's just look at DORA and say, well, let's just remove the financial side of this, and that it only it applies to financial institutions. And let's look at this objectively. If we use that as a baseline, are we meeting the same kind of levels of security that this is recommending? Because it's a good standard. It's the same with ISO 27001. They're built to be non-specific because there's lots of different organizations that have lots of different ways of doing business in lots of different sectors and lots of different spaces. And there's no one good way to do security. And I have a whole plethora of quotes, some of my own, some are other people's, like, security doesn't need to be expensive, it just needs to be effective. You've got Sun Tzu, who I quote a lot. If you know yourself and you know your enemy, then you need not fear the outcome of 100 battles. There's all kinds of situations over time where it's been proven time and time again that we really have to take security of, not only our organizations, but our critical industries very, very seriously. I mean, the human race has been on this planet for so many years now. I mean, over 20,000 years, it keeps getting longer and longer and longer. And security isn't a new concept for us. Since the first monkey hit the other monkey over the head with a rock to steal his food, that's when security was really born. Shortly after, instant response was born and risk management was born. These are all simple things. The only difference between us stealing stuff physically, like, Vikings coming in and stealing all the gold in the church, is, we've got different technology now and we have different ways of doing it. And the criminals very quickly learned that, going into a bank, putting a shotgun up the nose of the teller and asking for a bag load of cash was a really good way of getting caught very quickly, or shot, depending upon where you are in the world. Cybersecurity, the cyber side of things, made that kind of larceny far easier to do, and you could get far more. And, if you had to get rid of somebody, you could get rid of a couple of patsies, a couple of kids and that's what tends to happen. The big guys never get caught. So we've got to take it seriously, because if you don't take it seriously, you're going to end up like one of the many, many corpses of organizations that didn't take it seriously and they ended up going out of business. Now, that doesn't mean you need to be overzealous with it. And we have done podcasts on what overzealous security looks like and how difficult it can be to operate. But this is why it's important to bring on professionals who know what they're doing. Don't just rely on the IT teams. The IT teams are really brilliant at what they do, making sure technology is available and everything's available for the right people at the right time. But they're not built to be InfoSec people. InfoSec people look at what you're doing, they look at the vulnerabilities, and they kind of say a lot of what ifs. They do their risk management and they try and figure out what's the most probable thing that's going to try and, it's going to potentially happen? How can we mitigate that risk to a degree where it's acceptable and we know how to handle it? Which is a continuous process. And, you need to know a hell of a lot more than how to bring up a firewall in order to facilitate that function. And some organizations, unfortunately, are on the medium and small side, can't afford to have that kind of function within their business. A CISO nowadays is a very expensive undertaking if you want to get a good and experienced one. We do a lot of virtual CISOing for those smaller companies. That's the kind of thing that's available to them to meet those obligations, be it commercial, be it finance. And what you're also seeing, and I know I talk too much, so I'm going to leave this as a last point for this particular question. You're seeing a lot of organizations requiring their suppliers now to be ISO 27001 compliant, or to have security controls in place that are demonstratable. So it's not just now big companies need to do it, everybody is starting to get asked to do it. Because at some point recently, and it did amaze me, because this is something that InfoSec people have known for a long, long time. Now we virtualize everything and everything's moved over to the cloud and everything is as a service, and all software is now, it's not pieces of tin that's in a data center that you own. It's all now as a service subscription-based model things. You're very reliant on the security of your service providers, be they AI, be they SIEMs, be they cloud providers, to protect your environment as much as you want to protect your environment. So all that's really happening in this industry is we're finding that the requirements are getting bigger and bigger and bigger and further out into that supply chain, that it's getting difficult to try and fathom out where you are security-wise at any one time, because by the time you figured it out, you've got to start reanalyzing again. It's an interesting part of business, and watch this space, because there's going to be a lot more legislation coming out. There's a lot more being talked about AI legislation as well. And of course, a big chunk of that is security, because there are people out there that are scared that we're going to go Skynet and murder bots are going to come out of, and we're all going to get destroyed, and then we'll send somebody back to save John Connor in the background, which is all very sci-fi. But more likely, in a more realistic world, AI is going to become a very significant part of the way that we work and the way that we operate to make us more efficient. And, compliance and frameworks and what have you are going to be very, very quick to be built, because we've seen what happens when we don't do security. You end up with the situation we've seen in the last 4 or 5 years, where it's just gone crazy when it comes to people getting compromised.
Thank you for this elaborate answer. Although you've already touched upon this, but can you give us some examples of what value does Razorthorn Security bring to the clients? Maybe a couple of use cases, and where can people reach out to you if they're interested to talk about your services?
That's a good question. So obviously, you can reach out to us via www.razorthorn.com. That's obviously our website. Obviously, we're on LinkedIn like everybody else is. Just search for me, or we are one of the members of the team, or our company page. You can also find our podcast on, a lot of people go on YouTube to see it because there's a video on there. Just do a search for Razorthorn Security in YouTube, and you can find us and like and subscribe. I've got to say that for marketing purposes. But I mean, what value do we bring to customers? One of the reasons I started Razorthorn back in the day, and I looked at the other consultancies I'd been associated with over the years, and I knew, because I knew a lot of the early day ones, was a lot of them were very focused on getting money, selling services. And whilst you need that, because obviously you're a business, you need to survive, you need to grow, we focus very much on making sure that customers have got the right type of advice, warts and all. Obviously, we deliver it nicely and politically when it's really bad news, but we don't pull our punches, and we look after organizations who have a serious need to secure themselves. Some of our use cases are satellite firms that build and maintain satellites. We've got use cases for automotive, for wealth management, you name it, we've probably got a use case for it. And in every single one of those situations where we've gone into an organization to help them build out their security extensively through consultancy, which is kind of the bread and butter and the pen testing, it's very, very individual to those organizations. We look at the culture, we look at the business sector, we look at what they're trying to achieve. What are they looking to do over the next 12 months? What's their business plan? Because if we're going to secure it, we've got to understand them as an organization and the people in there. So we can try and weave security through, the organization a bit like a blanket. We don't want to destroy anything. They've still got to generate profit. They've still got to do business. But we very much specialize in making sure that the security supports that and evolves as the business evolves, because security can very quickly get really expensive if you don't do your groundwork at the beginning. And that's where we kind of come in. Get your own InfoSec people, then you can come to us and we'll help you do that. If you want assurance that what you're doing is correct, we can do security reviews. We can also do the pen testing and provide the C10 as well to help you understand where your vulnerabilities lie and support your security teams in making sure that they've got everything that they need in order to do what they have to do, which is secure the business. And we do it with a smile. We like a beer. So, we're pretty friendly all in all. We're not the people in the suits, as it used to be termed back in the day, who come in to ruin your day when you've got a critical project going live. We're there to kind of help you through that process and let you understand what you need to do. And we've got a lot of customers that go back a long, long way into the history of our organization. I think the longest customer that we have, who's been with us for literally 17 years since we first properly started. And they come back to us every year for very good reason.
That's a good reference to have.
Well, this is it. I mean, again, as I said, when I was sat there in a pub, it was the Anchor, on the South Bank. I thought, what would differentiate doing good customer work? If you've got a happy customer, they're going to come back to you time and time again. They learn to trust you. They know that you're not trying to rinse them for everything that you can get, and you're just giving them the advice that they need. When customers need a product, good example, we've got a lot of relationships with vendors. We try to offer at least 3 products in the space that the customer is looking at. Let them do the proof of concepts. Let them make the decision on what product works for them. I mean, we do a bit of groundwork, but it's the customer that's got to be happy with what they're doing. And we don't care about what commission we get or how much we charge. Yeah, okay, we got operational costs like any other business. But as I said before, if you're happy as a customer that you're getting what you need when you need it, we're happy. And that's what we do.
Great. I guess the ending to the answer, but also to our episode. Thank you so much, Jim, for coming to the show. I hope we'll see each other either on another episode or perhaps here in London, because you guys are you're based in Kent, so it's kind of nearby. Yeah, thank you for sharing your story, valuable insights. That was all for today, and I hope to catch up again, maybe in that South Bank pub.
Absolutely, where it all started. Thank you very much. It's been absolutely fantastic.
Thank you, Jim. Bye.